It took just 1 week. 1 week was really all the time that was needed for this man, the President of the United States, to have his first diplomatic crisis. So who was this crisis with? Well, you can probably guess that the answer is Mexico.
Mexico is the new China. Mexico is killing us. The country of Mexico is killing us.
Donald Trump is, well, let's say unique. He might be the only head of state capable of defying in public a foreign president. In this case, that's Peña Nieto by telling him on Twitter that if he doesn't travel to Washington with the idea of paying for the wall, he may as well stay at home. Needless to say, the visit never happened.
Lo he dicho una y otra vez. México no pagará ningún muro.
But don't worry, viewers, we've had enough Trump talk too. The Donald is not going to be the main character in this video. Today, we're going to focus on the NAFTA agreement and especially on the relationship between Mexico and the United States of America. NAFTA is a free trade agreement between the US, Canada, and Mexico. It was negotiated by President George H.W. Bush in 1992, and it was ratified and implemented by Bill Clinton in 1994.
Thank you very much.
This means NAFTA has been supported both by Democrats and Republicans. But let's take a look back and analyze which events took place south of the Bravo River. Let's travel back in time to the 1980s, a time when Mexico was exhausted. The country's economic model was a worn-out, closed economy, and they were in a state of crisis. In fact, it was at that time that massive emigration from Mexico to the US started to happen. And it wasn't just any migratory wave, it was one of the biggest migration waves of all time. And all of this happened in a time when Americans weren't particularly liked in Mexico. Since the war with the US from 1846 to 1848, when Mexico lost more than half of its territory, the popular sentiment in the country was that the US was a great villain and an enemy that Mexico was facing. By 1988, it was clear that Mexico's closed system was worn out, and the president of Mexico, who at the time was Carlos Salinas, a Harvard graduate by the way, decided to end this and opted for opening up Mexico to the outside world. In his own words, "The US is not the worst threat, but the best opportunity." And the leaders in North America decided they didn't want to waste this chance. They got down to business and decided to bet on extending to Mexico a free trade agreement that they had recently signed with Canada. With this, NAFTA was born. Since then, relations between the US and Mexico have expanded a great deal. It is estimated the trade between the two countries today exceeds $500 billion. Now, $500 billion, which is $500 billion, is quite a hard number to get your head around. In more relatable terms, each minute that means more than $1 million worth of products crosses the border of the US and Mexico. Or to put it in a more international context, trade between the US and Mexico is the equivalent of the Chilean economy and is more than the entire economy of Argentina. The current American president, Donald Trump, threatens this agreement and has even considered putting an end to it because, according to him, it is the worst agreement that the US has ever signed.
NAFTA is the worst trade deal maybe ever signed anywhere, but certainly ever signed in this country.
Now, that's just what he says, and the reality, well, it's rather different. NAFTA has, in general, been something of a goldmine for the United States. It has been said that whenever Trump has a nightmare, it's always the same thing. He sees a Mexican stealing his wallet.
Ese es mi compromiso y tú sabes que lo voy a cumplir.
Anyway, we don't know if this is true, it's probably not, but it would explain his obsession with Mexico and also why, whenever he thinks of NAFTA, he thinks of the American people getting robbed. But don't think that it is only the president who holds this opinion. Many defenders of protectionism in the US state that Mexican and Canadian workers are causing American jobs to disappear because of free trade. Specifically, they claim that imports exceed exports by almost $80 billion, and that's a lot of money. But the reality is that these figures are about as reliable as a chocolate teapot. First, there are two goods that twist those numbers which have nothing to do with NAFTA: petrol and natural gas. And this is really important because if we don't consider those products, that trade hole that Trump is talking about, it pretty much disappears. And so now some of you are probably thinking, well, Simon, why wouldn't you consider petrol and natural gas? And that's a good question. Well, that's because unless Trump wants to take the United States back to the Stone Age, he will have to keep getting all the petrol the country needs, whether that's from Mexico, Canada, Saudi Arabia, or, well, anywhere else. But these fudged figures aren't the only ones the protectionist dreamers also fudge the figures for. They also do this by not considering service businesses. This includes things like the financial sector, insurance sector, traveling, consulting, the internet, etc., etc., etc. But ignoring these things is like saying that banks don't make money and that Google simply doesn't exist. So if we adjust these two figures, it turns out that the USA's result is not a deficit, but actually a surplus. That's true for both Mexico as well as Canada. It's actually a surplus of more than $40 billion. In any case, the Americans are really the ones who are making off like bandits in this trade relationship. Alright, but in Mexico it's a bit different because even correcting the numbers, the US still gets the deficit in this relationship. So the question is, what is the actual number? Well, wait for it, approximately, drumroll please, 0.25% of its GDP. Yes, I'm sorry to disappoint you, it is really that little. In fact, the deficit is actually smaller than the one they have with China, Japan, or Germany. Almost all American industries export to Mexico more than they import, with the exception of automobiles. So you can guess where the profits are going to end up. But there is more. It is said that the main reason for the companies moving their factories to Mexico is because the wages are lower, but that's only half the truth, and certainly isn't the main reason. What's interesting about Mexico for car companies is that Mexico has many more free trade agreements with other countries than the US does, and this allows them to produce and sell their cars in other markets like Brazil and the European Union without tariffs, which saves them a lot of money, about $700 million a year. And where are the benefits of these operations going to end up? Yes, once again, back in the pocket of the United States of America. Just like happens with casinos, the house always wins. So thanks to Mexico, car companies in the USA are more competitive and have more profits, while consumers in America can buy much cheaper cars. And because of all of this, Americans have more money to go to the cinema, to buy clothes, to change their smartphones more often, and take part in all that consumer spending that we all love so much. This all makes the economic wheels spin faster and faster. So it now probably seems to you that, yeah, Mexico's actually pretty important to the USA. But imagine the other way round. Almost 80% of Mexican exports end up in their northern neighbor. So it's no surprise that the threat of the end of NAFTA has reminded many of the famous quote attributed to Porfirio Diaz, "Poor Mexico, so far from God and so near the USA." NAFTA has been incredibly positive for Mexico. As a quick example, do you know which is the biggest employer in Mexico? Well, that's Walmart. Unfortunately, this huge investment by US companies hasn't actually given the growth that was expected. And for the reason for that, we need to look at responsibility inside Mexico itself. Now, the truth is, the Mexican politicians don't know how to take advantage of this fantastic opportunity to make Mexico more modern and more competitive. And as you know, bad politics equals bad results. So does all of this mean that Mexico has to kneel in front of Donald Trump? Well, certainly not. Donald Trump has threatened Mexico with high tariffs on their products if they refuse to pay for the wall. To be specific, Trump's administration has threatened a 20% tariff increase. For starters, well, this would be illegal. There are rules in the World Trade Organization that prevent this from happening. One of these is known as the most favored nation, which means that one member of the WTO cannot discriminate against another. In fact, this means that the maximum tariff would be limited to 3% in the case that NAFTA were abolished. This would be a tax for consumers and American companies, countries and wouldn't affect the trade between the two nations. But even if the US, with the approval of Congress, were willing to ignore international law, Mexico has enough resources to fight and try and stop this. First, Mexico would be able to take advantage of the influence of the multinational corporations operating in Mexico, which could stand to lose billions of dollars. And this is not just the influence of a few rich men, we're talking about all of these companies' workers and their shareholders, as well as millions of individual savers throughout the United States. And the second reason, well, relations between Mexico and the US aren't just commercial. Immigration, drug trafficking, terrorism, these are just a few aspects of their relationship. If Trump attacks economically, Mexico could fight back, for example, by letting the US drown in drugs and immigration waves from countries all across Latin America. The fact is that the US and Mexico need each other more than it seems, and Mexico is not in as weak of a position as Trump thinks. Although the president of Mexico is unpredictable, it does look like he understands this, and the message from his government is clear. Let's talk about NAFTA, we can renegotiate this treaty, but then all these other treaties are also going to be open to negotiation. So this is what we think is going to happen here at VisualPolitik, and we'd love to know what you think. Do you think Mexico should defend itself tooth and nail, even with the risk of triggering a trade war with the United States? Or do you think the nation should be patient to let things go and look for a solution elsewhere? Let us know in the comments below. We do read them and we try to reply when we can. Don't forget that we put out brand new videos every Monday and Thursday, so do not forget to subscribe. And as always, I'll see you in the next video.
I think I'm going to win the Mexican vote. Mexico. We have a problem called Mexico. I mean, Mexico's killing us. Mexico's killing us. Mexico is disgusting. Mexico. They're killing us, Chuck. El hombre del pelequin. I don't care if I mispronounce it, doesn't matter.